And I would expect as people use the raise hand function, that they'll come, even if they, for me, are on page 2 of the tiles, they'll come to page 1. Like I don't have to, do I have to keep scrolling to look for
I don't believe you do. So
okay.
The idea here is that that Roger will pin the people. So 7 people want to express a view on Article 7. We'll cluster them all together, and they should be pinned to the top. And when it gets over, they'll get pushed away, and the next group of people will be pinned to the top, so we'll all better see them at once. The only problem that comes is if we have more people than spaces available on the top of the screen, that could be a bit of a challenge. But Roger, right. I've been at town meetings where it's been tragic that I'm short of a call. So everyone's calling people to try and get them to come there.
I'll just speak now to the 52 people who are.
I muted John because you guys were talking. So he has to unmute himself.
Oh, but yeah.
And Brian, so maybe what we were talking about was
Good evening to those of you who have gathered already. Thank you very much for joining the meeting ahead of schedule. This will give us a chance to address any technical issues that we might have and possibly you might have as well. One thing that's important during the meeting for us is to know the names of who wishes to speak. And to that end, we ask that each of you who don't have your complete name, that is first and second and last name, visible with your image, your video image, to please correct that. For example, there's a Martha, and it would be helpful, for example, if that person included a last name. Sometimes there are names that are merely your email address, and we might be able to know who you are, but we don't want to make it difficult for you. We would simply like to have your names because we cannot recognize you to speak unless we have your name. So it'll help a great deal if you take some time right now and get that fixed on your screen. Thank you. We'll be starting in about 4 minutes. While we're just biding our time, for those of you who might wish to speak, and you never know when you might wish to do that, we're going to need you to be able to raise your hand, figuratively speaking, not by doing this, but rather by electronically raising your hand so that we can make a list of those who wish to speak on any particular topic. And then I will do my best to call upon them in the order that we have seen the name. So if you're uncertain about how to raise your hand electronically, the method is quite simple. Simply click on participants. And for some reason, I'm not able to do that right now, but I believe that if you click on participants, you will be, oh, I see it. You can presume that Roger, I hope I'm correct in understanding that the technique is to click on participants and then there will be I take it back. I'm seeing now that there is an icon that says raise your hand or raise hand at the bottom. So that's how you do it. If you're joining us by telephone, which some of you will, to raise your hand, I believe you press *9. And then to put your hand down, which we will also ask you to do, press *9 again. For those who are joining us by telephone, you also, of course, cannot show us your name on a screen. But if you raise your hand by pressing *9, we will see your number and we will ask you to give us your name at that time when we're sort of gathering the names of all those who wish to speak on a particular topic. Once the meeting starts, I will give you an overview of the agenda, and I will outline what I would call guidelines for a meeting which is both civil and constructive, where we convey a lot of information, both from the people of this town as well as from the select board and the school board.
I have something to say. Very quick. If we were in the Tracy Hall, we'd all say hi to our neighbors. So I'm just saying, hi, everybody. And I'll go on to silent.
Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you. We will start in 1 minute. And so now we will begin the meeting itself.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. The meeting will come to order. This is the annual meeting of the town of Norwich, Vermont, and the Norwich Town School District. It's a joint meeting of the two bodies convened on this date, the 28th of February. I'm John Carroll. I'm the moderator for this meeting. The meeting is conducted, and it's my responsibility to ensure that it is conducted in accordance with state law, which has lots to say about these things, and also in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, which by...
John, sorry, you got muted. We have to unmute you, sorry.
Thank you. So the meeting will be conducted under the rules of statute, as well as the Robert's Rules of Order, which are required to be employed in a meeting of a school district. And this is a meeting of a school district as well as a municipality, a town. The meeting is called and duly warned to transact business by a warning that was duly issued well in advance of the meeting by, I believe, the town clerk. This meeting is a part of an entire thing called the town meeting or the annual meeting, which has two parts. It has this meeting, which is an information session only, and then it has the voting part. So you will notice, if you're really still with us at the very end, when I adjourn the meeting, it will be to a time certain, that is to say until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning when voting at Tracy Hall begins. When that voting concludes, then the entire meeting is done and adjourned at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. So we will adjourn to a time certain, which is clearly anticipated by statute. This is a public meeting as defined by Vermont statute, and ordinarily meetings like this would be in person. But as you all know, in these times, under these circumstances, by virtue of Act 92, the meeting is conducted electronically and may be attended by means of Zoom or by means of a telephone, that is internet connection to Zoom or a telephone connection to Zoom. We've given necessary notice of the meeting, including that there is no public place for attendance by the public. Then all of this is in compliance with the provisions of Act 92, much the way that the Select Board and the School Board now routinely conduct their meetings. I want to speak now about the agenda. The agenda for the meeting is determined by the official warning for the meeting. The warning stipulates 42 articles, and all articles must be addressed by this meeting. The individual articles will be grouped so that people don't have to be hopping up and down. The way they're numbered right now does not lend itself to easy conduct of a meeting, and so I have grouped them differently. Reminder that this is informational meeting only. There will be no voting at this meeting, except possibly the body may choose to vote at Articles 38 and 42 at the end of the meeting, called Other Business. And when we get to that, I'll outline for you the limits of what we can do there. I can assure you we can't do very much when it comes to other business. We can adopt a resolution to honor our retiring school teacher and a few things like that. But it is against state statute, very clear, that other business is not to be used for the adoption of policies or directions that, quote, bind any entity in the town, including the Select Board and the School Board. Except for a few of the procedural articles, which I will get to, there are 5 of them, all the other articles on the ballot, on the warning and on the ballot, will be on the ballot. And you will have an opportunity by tomorrow, by secret ballot, to vote for them, unless perhaps you've already voted by absentee ballot. The agenda is 42 articles long, and I give thanks to the vice chair of the select board who has frequently sent out this agenda on the listserv. So if you have looked at it, you've seen it's a rather mixed bag of items. Here's how we're going to approach them. There will be 5 groups of articles. The first group is Articles 1, 2, and 3, which are essentially procedural, and as moderator, I will speak to them, and no action will be required, nor for that matter will there be any discussion, since they're purely pro forma procedural articles. Articles 4 through 14 plus Article 37 are the 12 articles that are proposed by or the responsibility of the select board, and we will take them up next. Once we're done with those articles, we'll move on to Articles 39, 40, and 41, which are the articles proposed by the school board. When we're done with the school board, we'll move on to Articles 15 through 36, which is a long list of appropriations to nonprofit groups in the Upper Valley region. When we're done with those 22 articles, we then move on to Articles 38 and 42, which are to transact any other business. And there's a sort of special set of rules that applies to that. We'll take that up. It may be very quick. It may be more lengthy. And at the conclusion of that group, then the meeting will be adjourned. So let me now just give you some guidelines about speaking. The way this will work is that we'll take up a group of articles, let's say the select board articles, 12 of them. We'll invite the select board to make a presentation on the 12 articles to say whatever they wish to say. They'll have a period of time in which to do that. At that point, we'll stop and turn to you, the public, and invite you, any of you, to speak to those 12 articles. You may make a comment. You may pose a question. You would have 2 minutes to do either. In doing so, we ask, in fact, we insist, that you restrict your comments and questions to those 12 articles. And the sequence will be, and we'll go over it later, it will be that you will be recognized because you have put up your hand already. We've gotten your name. We put your name on a list, and we'll have a list of, let's say, 10 people who want to talk about the select board's articles. Once we have that list, I'll ask by name I will recognize individuals in the order on the list. They will be invited to speak for 2 minutes. And each of you will be expected to give your name. You don't need to give us your locatable address. Give us your name and the article or articles that you wish to address, keeping in mind that you must restrict yourselves to those articles of the 12 articles of the select board. Once that's done, we move on to the school board, and there are 3 articles. When they're done presenting their views on those 3 articles, we move on to you, back to you for comments and questions in the same sequence. Begin by asking you to raise your hand to be recognized to speak. We take down your name, and if you're on the phone, we'll see your number and we'll ask you your name. And then that list will be posted from me, and I will call from that list, and so on. I'll get further as we get closer to the actual speaking by the public. I will outline for you some guidelines that are in support of clarity of communication, and which are also in support of courtesy and a civil dialogue, which to this moderator is imperative. And I think it is desirable on the part of virtually everybody in our community. But now we will turn to the first group of articles. Now, these 3 articles are essentially procedural. We will not make provision for public comment or question. They're really quite self-evident. and I'll just read them very quickly. The way the warning reads is, this meeting is called to determine if the town will, and then it starts listing a whole bunch of articles. The first article is Article 1, elect a moderator at the town school district meeting for 1 year. Article 2, elect town and district officers for terms starting in 2022. And Article 3, hear and act upon the reports of the officers of the town and the town school district. So what these three articles do is that they essentially summarize the contents of the ballot that you will see tomorrow, or that you saw when you voted absentee. One part of the first item on the ballot is, I think, is electing a moderator. I think the next thing is electing town and school district officers. And then finally, there's a bundle of the articles that we will be discussing this evening. So I think that's fairly clear. The Article 3 is interesting because it says, Article 3, hear and act on the reports of the town, of the officers of town and the town school district. Tonight, we are hearing their messages in support of these articles. However, we are not acting. I just wish to be very clear. We take no action at this meeting. All right, then. We can now move on to the second group of articles. This is the group in which the select board will make their presentation about 12 articles, and after which you, members of the public, will be invited to pose questions. And the chair recognizes the chair of the Board of Selectmen and a member, the chair being Mr. Arnold, and the member being Ms. Brochu. Please proceed.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. Thank you to our moderator and to all of you for being here. As our moderator said, my name is Roger Arnold, and I will be presenting with board member Claudette Brochu. We have a brief slideshow that we will present on behalf of the board, whose members include our Vice Chair, Mary Layton, Marcia Calloway, and Robert Gear. So let me do that. The presentation is in 2 parts and shall take approximately 20 minutes. The first half is on the FY23 operating budget and budget governance, and the second half will be on the articles. A recorded version of this presentation is available on the town's website.
So hello, everybody. I'm Claudette Brochu, as Roger mentioned, and thank you, John Carroll, for moderating this meeting. So as Roger said, this presentation is in 2 parts. We'll talk about the fiscal year 23 budget, our goals for the budget, which were fairly straightforward, and also share some charts with historical information. Just keep in mind that the fiscal year 23 budget covers the cost from July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. We're going to share information on the establishment of an unanticipated and emergency expense reserve fund, the establishment of an Emerald Ash Borer Response Reserve Fund, and the establishment of an Operational Performance and Development Reserve Fund. So Article 4 shall ask the voters to approve a gross spending general town budget of $4,958,865, plus state and federal grants and gifts consistent with budgeted programs for the period July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2023.
The board advised staff in November at the start of budget preparations to establish a level service operating budget. The proposed FY23 budget before you, the voters, reflects a commitment to maintaining current services while making best efforts to account for high inflation rate and other outcomes of and expected of the COVID pandemic. I should mention that this budget was capably and intelligently overseen by interim and now permanent town manager Rod Francis and Fielding Asensa, our new finance director. We benefited incredibly from having a finance director to assist in this process. And thanks to them and all of our amazing department heads for their work in establishing or helping the board establish its goals towards a level service budget in a uniquely challenging year. With all that said, the FY 22-23 operating budget has a proposed increase of 3.72% from the previous fiscal year.
So in the proposed fiscal year 23 budget, operations, as Roger mentioned, represent a 3.72% increase. Allocations to reserve funds actually decreased by 7.76%. We decreased the allocations to records restoration, general administration equipment, fire equipment, sidewalks, paving, and bridges, while increasing allocations to the reappraisal fund, the police department cruiser fund, fire department apparatus, and the generator funds. These were calculated decisions, but resulted in a decrease of 7.76% in reserve fund allocations. Assuming that the other monetary articles for social service agencies were to pass, voters will be considering a budget of $5,375,473, or 3.85% total increase over this year's current spending levels. This is a chart just showing the town's expenses over time. Provides a visual provides some visual information. Our debt service covers, I lost my place. Covers the tower bond and interest, public safety facility bond and interest, the Trails Bridge principal and interest, and the safety facility highway garage fund overage and interest. The first payment to the Brown Schoolhouse Bridge was started actually in July of 2021. So the town maintains 45 reserve funds that set aside money for stated purposes. Examples of town reserve funds include funds for highway equipment, townwide reappraisals, and more. And once established by the voters, money in a reserve fund may be expended by the select board for its stated purpose. Any money not spent in a reserve fund actually carries over, and each fund collects interest. Historically in Norwich, we have referred to these as designated funds. We're now following the terminology in statute to reduce any confusion about how these funds are structured and operated. This is the chart just showing reserve fund appropriations over the years. You can see there was a sharp uptick between 2012 and 2013. These increases were a result of funding a facilities study, increasing the records restoration, police department special equipment, and especially the communication tower bond. The allocation decreases in 2022 were as a result of the 2017 flooding event, where we wanted to be very judicious in our budget appropriations just to minimize the tax impact on the town. So allocations to reserve, as you can see, allocations to reserve funds can change over time, especially as the board receives insight and recommendations from new department directors, when we can reasonably expect or anticipate increases in state or federal funding, or as the town and or board priorities shift. The reserve funds can be the main form of financing for capital projects. Last month, the board approved a 5-year capital improvement plan, or CIP. The CIP will be refined each year to ensure that all associated capital assets and their costs are properly budgeted. We intend to look closely at our reserve fund allocations as part of this work. During our upcoming budget cycles, especially as we continue to work on the CIP, we should really expect to see changes in reserve fund allocations.
We know it's important for folks to see the possible tax rate implications in any budget proposal. These numbers are estimated only. There are a variety of factors that determine tax rate outside of increases or decreases to a budget. For example, these numbers are informed by last year's grand list, which is lodged in April after town meeting, and the final tax rate is ultimately set in July by the board.
So going into any budget season, the overarching goal of the board is try to avoid significant increases in the tax rate. However, some increases should be expected, in part due to cost of living increases and step grade increases for employees. This year, we also had to acknowledge and budget for inflation. For the continued stabilization of the tax rate, the select board will continue to work with the town manager, finance director, and our department managers to understand the relationship between operating budget, reserve fund balances, level of debt service, and capital budgeting.
And so, Mr. Moderator, we will turn to information on Articles 5 through 14. So Article 5 asks the voters to eliminate the office of grand juror. Municipal voters at town meeting previously had the duty to elect a town agent to prosecute and defend suits in which the town or school district is interested in. Due to provisions made in new legislation, we are allowed to ask voters to eliminate this office, and it hasn't been filled in a number of years. Similarly, in Article 6, shall the voters eliminate the office of town agent? A town agent, or I think this should say grand juror, had the ability to inquire into any person's offenses. And similarly, we have the provision to remove it, and we are asking for that.
So Article 7 asks the voters to approve the formation of an unanticipated expenses and emergency reserve fund to be governed by the purpose statement provided in the town report, and which we'll show in just a minute. This will be initially funded through a transfer of $750,000 from the fiscal year 22 unrestricted fund balance, and will be maintained in subsequent years at a level between 12 and 16% of the annual operating budget, which is approximately 2 months of operating costs, through the transfer of any fund balance that may remain in the general fund from the prior year's operating budget as approved by the select board, and or allocations in the proposed operating budget as approved by the voters.
Okay.
The transfer of $750 from the unrestricted fund balance is a surplus in the general fund, not money spent from previous years or money not spent from previous years' operating budgets.
That's right. And as Claudette mentioned, the $750,000 balance is part of a general fund and is unspent surplus from previous year's operating budgets. The board's current practice and policy and master financial policy has been to maintain these monies as an emergency fund balance within the town's general fund. Through our policy work this past year, we learned that to meet full compliance with statute and best practices, an emergency fund balance should be kept in a separate reserve fund. The board is asking the voters to establish a separate unanticipated expenses and emergency reserve fund, and to approve its purpose statement. So really quickly, what you see here, this is a very attempt to explain a very technical thing, right? So you have statute that governs a general fund, all funds come into that. The master financial policy governs 12 to 16% or 2 months of an operating budget in an emergency reserve. And then money comes out through expenditures and designated fund allocations. We are now seeking folks to have the emergency balance be a part of reserve fund, arguably the most important emergency fund, right there. Okay. Unassigned or surplus funds have been expended in the past for an array of purposes with no discernible pattern and not always with voter authorization. Our finance office pulled the data, right? During the major storm in 2017, the board expended the unassigned balance contrary to policy and without voter authorization because we needed to ensure funds to bring necessary emergency improvements to our communities. Similarly, for years, the board would buy down a tax rate in July without voter authorization and outside the space of town meeting. This article is not in response to this background, but this proposed reserve fund nonetheless is important and necessary towards proper clarity for all. And I will say too, the structure conforms with statute as reviewed by legal counsel, and the unintended expenses and emergency reserve fund purpose statement matches the master financial policy. And its purpose statement would be to fund operations by providing sufficient working capital for adequate cash flow, help defray the cost of borrowing or financial impacts caused by economic downturns, shortfalls of revenues, the imposition of additional costs by other governmental agencies, including courts, cutbacks and distributions from state or federal government, natural disasters, and other unforeseen circumstances. Okay.
So Article 8 asks the voters to approve the establishment of an operational performance and development fund. We'll show the purpose statement in just a minute. To be initially funded through a transfer of $110,000 from the fiscal year 22 unrestricted fund balance. The operational performance and development fund will support reviews of town operations, technical studies, and meeting grant obligations such as needed. Currently, if the town wants to undertake any study that may be proposed during a budget year, our options are limited. We can either pull funds from existing line items within the controls of our financial policies, hope a grant can be identified to cover the study, or defer the study until we can raise funds at the next town meeting. While we recognize the studies with the purpose of reviewing town operations to improve efficiency or environmental performance are not easily supported by outside grant sources, but are still very important. In the first year of this reserve fund, the board intends to finance a 4 to 6 month review of policing and community safety, and to better understand the Beaver Meadow sidewalk proposal more broadly. These studies will not be impacting the fiscal year 23 budget or the fiscal year 23 tax rate, as their financing will be coming from what was previously called the unrestricted fund balance. We're placing these studies as articles on the warrant because we are signaling to you, the voters, our intentions with this first year of the Operational Performance Fund. Expenditures from reserve funds will normally be up to the select board to determine, but we wanted you to see what our initial plans were for these funds. In the future, the board may choose to make regular allocations to this fund and to consider other routine or special review of town operations with these funds. In August, the board authored a request for proposals, or an RFP, for consulting services on policing and community safety in order to better understand what type of public safety services are desired by the community. The board relied on active and thoughtful community members to bring sensitivity and commitment to board discussions leading up to the release of the RFP. We received 2 bids. Bid 1 requires 4 months to produce a set of recommendations for police procedures and policies informed by recent trends in policing reform. Bid 2 requires 6 months and will create and train a task force in an open-ended approach to reimagine public safety more broadly. And the information detailing both of these responses to our RFP can be found in the December 22-21 Select Board packet.
Okay, Article 10, Beaver Meadow Road, Main Street to Moore Lane will be placed in a broader context in the master plan for bike and pedestrian facilities with particular focus on the village area. Planning may focus on traffic safety, site control for right-of-way, number of road crossings, and other matters identified as important for a future investigation in a recently completed phase 1 study. Long-range planning will allow town staff to more accurately identify scope, cost of construction, and priorities with other existing sidewalks. For folks who followed this project, you may know that the board was operating with an understanding that there were 3 distinct phases for any project. And of course, we learned late in the process that the grant source obligated phase 2 to have a phase 3 construction. And so this is effectively a phase 2 that we are asking for funding for. But then what is new is it asks for a broader context within the context of a town plan action item. Okay. Oh, Article 11 asks voters to approve the establishment of an Emerald Ash Borer Response Fund. It will be funded in new allocations and also with funds from reserve funds that have not been used for several years. So we're hearing lots of discussion about reserve funds this evening. So Article 13 and 14, we're asking you to approve a transfer from funds that have not been used for the Pool Fund and the Long-Term Facilities Fund. These are not closing or eliminating these funds, but effectively closing them out. So there's new money, but then also some money from existing reserves. Okay. The purpose statement is to support the mapping in response to the emerald ash borer infected trees in the town of Norwich. The Conservation Commission has done important work in mapping existing ash trees along roadways to prepare for the arrival of the emerald ash borer. We anticipate additional mapping needs and related preparatory response to begin to tackle EAB.
So Article 11 again, emerald ash borer is an invasive insect that attacks and kills 99% of all 3 species of ash trees found in Vermont. This is from the UVM Extension Service. The emerald ash borer has been found in Hartford, Thetford, and other neighboring towns. Although the emerald ash borer has not been found in Norwich so far, the assumption can be made that the bug is here. The next slide is showing the mapping that Roger mentioned that was done by the Conservation Commission on some of the major roadways in town. And as you can see, these are quarter-mile segments, and it shows how many ash trees are in that quarter-mile segment. So we have a lot of ash trees. And the following slide does the same thing. So although infected trees may take years to show the impact of infestation, there may be some trees that may survive the infestation. Most of the trees will die. While we hope that the state will provide some funds and guidance, the town needs to develop a plan on how we will respond to the emerald ash borer. The options are limited. Some communities are preemptively cutting down all of their ash trees. There's some chemical applications that are not great and are very expensive. But anyway, again, the options are limited and the cost is significant. The establishment of this fund will at least get us started in how we're going to plan on mitigating the emerald ash borer.
Okay, and so obviously the moderator will direct us to answer your questions within this space, but if I should just mention again that a version of this presentation is available on the town's YouTube channel, the link of which is from the main page of the town website. And folks should really feel free to contact the town manager's office directly if they have any questions. This slide says to contact us, but at this point in the game, feel free to reach out directly to our town manager. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing of my screen.
Very good. We thank the members of the Select Board for their presentation. Now, ordinarily at this time, we would turn to hear from the public, but I've been informed that we have a visitor. Every year, it's a rather nice tradition that we have visits from our elected state representatives and senators. And on the line and joining us at this time is Senator Alice Nitka of Ludlow. And Alice would like to address us very briefly. Alice, it's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much to the people of Norwich for allowing me to speak. And I'll just go through some of the things that are going on my committees. I serve as the Vice Chair of Appropriation and on the Judiciary Committee and also on Judicial Retention, which is a committee which reviews the performances of judges. So what's going on now in appropriations, I'll go through my notes here. We have been working on and passed the Budget Adjustment Act, which looks to changes that needed to be made to the 21-22 budget, the budgeting year, which ends on June 30th of this year. The adjustment budget spends $379 million. There is much money that wasn't spent in last year, this current year that we're in, and some additional money that needed to be spent and was available in some areas. We had put aside some money from last year as we were still getting guidance from the federal government as to where some of the federal money could be spent in certain areas. If you spend it beyond what is allowed, they of course will claw it back, so to speak. The budget adjustment just passed last week and will be going to the governor for his signature. Pretty much the legislature, the House and the Senate are in agreement, as is the government, as to the amount to be spent, although there are some differences with the governor as to where some of the spending would be. I'll tell you where some of the spending occurred, and the adjustment was, in addition to paying down a lot of the deficits in some areas, such as we spent $200 million to redeem outstanding bonds, such as some of it went $20 million to pay off outstanding transportation infrastructure bonds. Some other things, and other things like that, so that our interest that we are paying on all these things is reduced. Also on the it will be spent in the budget itself on pension to pay down the interest on pensions and healthcare, which for some years was not actually paid for retired teachers. So rather than spending, the education money on all of that, we're spending some of this money that we have now to try and pay down some of that debt to reduce the interest. Some other things that you don't hear much about, but were spent in the budget adjustment: $5 million for the Department of Corrections. They, of course, have been short-staffed, as have many places, but they have needs 24 hours a day, and staffing can only be reduced to a certain amount. Many offenders were let out due to COVID, if they were elderly, if they had medical problems. So even though the population was decreased, as were some other prisoners let out to try and reduce the incidence of COVID in the prisons. But anyway, these guards were working a great deal of overtime, sometimes sleeping in their cars to be ready for the next shift. And also they had probation and parole officers working in the prisons as well. So this $4.9 million will help with staff recruitment and retention. The other thing spent $6 million for retention payments for childcare staff, $1 million for adult day services. Money was given to the department, $18 million to the Department of Labor with regard to the unemployment insurance program, administration expense. Vermont Food Bank, $6 million, $9.7 million to Vermont State Colleges for a second round of critical occupation scholarships, $1 million for a second round of workforce training at UVM for Vermont residents, $2 million for working lands, $25 million to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board for affordable housing, and also an unusual program, $2.6 million for the dairy margin coverage program to provide dairy operations with risk management coverage when there is a gap between milk prices and average feed costs as defined by the program. It's a program to try and help our farmers. The other thing, let's see. We are now moving away from the budget adjustment, and the full budget we're working on now for the 22-23 year. And this will include all the transportation money spent in the state, and where that is spent is determined by the Transportation Committee, who then gives us their recommendations. And, we go over, we review the money. That's money spent for roads, bridges, airports, bike paths, all the equipment for snow plows, everything else. And
Senator Nitka, I wonder if I hate to interrupt, I wonder if you might wrap in a minute or so.
Yes, certainly. Glad to wrap up. In judiciary, there are a lot of bills going on, and I saw on your board you were dealing with a lot of police issues. Those are also issues in the legislature, and some of them that you might want to look at are S-254, qualified immunity or a private right of action against police. That's a very controversial bill. Don't know where it will be. Also, changing civil juries to a fewer number than 12 the criminal juries would not change. But there's a lot of work that has been done in judiciary with regard to policing that someone might want to take a look at some of the things that have happened over the past 4 or 5 years to bring us forward to a more modern police force. So thank you very much.
Senator Nitka, we thank you very much for joining us from Ludlow. We wish you well in the remainder of this biennium. Thank you so much. And now, I've been informed that another member of the legislature, Representative Jim Masland, whom I'm sure many of you know since he's our neighbor in Thetford and represents Thetford, Norwich, and 2 other towns, is on board and is available to speak with us. Representative Masland, we welcome you and we look forward to your brief observations. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and I will attempt to be brief. I don't know who's gone before me and how much stuff you've already heard twice. I will just try to address some things that I think are of more local concern to Norwich residents. And as you may have known, if Tim has already spoken, I apologize. I was at an EC Fiber Executive Committee meeting while you guys were getting going this evening. As we do every year at this time and other times throughout the year, we've posted the Jim and Tim report at jimandtim.com, report.com. I will see if Tim hasn't already that Bonnie Monday has that link available and somehow it's, put out to everybody. So anyway, things that are of concern, I think, to Norwich voters, school voters, or things that are ongoing in the legislature, among other places, Ways and Means, which is the committee where I serve. One has to do with the per pupil weights. Maybe some people who are closely following education spending will be concerned about that. Those who are aficionados of education funding know that the way our school funding is constructed is money goes to towns on a per pupil basis. And in simpler times, we just count all the students and that would be it. But a number of years ago, the legislature, the education community recognized correctly that it costs more to educate a high school student than it does a middle school student and down on to the elementary school student. Students in poverty cost more to educate. English learners, social people who are socially disadvantaged. And we have had a system of weights for a number of years that on retrospect was not based on empirical data at all. It was just something that was concocted, I suppose, with the best of intentions, but prior to Act 60 even. And so we're in the process of redoing that, which is a considerable amount of work. And rather than dwell on the nuts and bolts of it, please stay tuned. I'm sure the school board will want to talk to us as we come closer to a resolution. That's one thing. I'd also want to put in, Alice was talking about funding for the Vermont State Colleges. I'd like to put it in a big substantial plug for Vermont State College system. It does seem to be excuse the phone in the background, I can't turn it off. It does seem to be something that we're spending a lot of money on recently, but what is critically important to recognize is that the Vermont State College system, the colleges and universities educate Vermonters who stay in Vermont for the most part, as opposed to flagship universities and whatnot. And we, the state colleges, fund healthcare work, teach healthcare workers, nurses, teachers, mental health counselors, and on down the list. These are occupations that need to be filled, and the state colleges do an excellent job of training people for those professions. And so I'm putting in a big plug for that, and that'll be it on that one, John. And I guess I would just say, please contact Tim and me anytime you choose. If there are things in our Jim and Tim report that aren't addressed, please be aware that there's a whole raft of other things out there that we're happy to inform you of, or take your opinions, or try to address to meet your needs. So once again, it's a privilege to be here with you this evening, John, and I think that'll close me up for right now. Happy retirement from being the town moderator, sir.
Thank you. You're a master of brevity, sir. Thank you.
Try to.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now, board, we're just about to return to the select board's 12 articles, and it's time, getting very close to time, to invite you members of the public to join us in speaking with your questions or your comments. Before we do, I realize I neglected to attend to a housekeeping matter, which I think is perhaps, I hope, moot at this point. Occasionally, we will have a system failure that affects the Zoom access for all or many of us, or there may be a problem with the CATV hookup. Unlikely, but in the event that such an event should happen, we have a phone here standing by to call so that we may be informed of this, because we may not be aware of it. This is not you're having trouble getting on or anything like that. It's about this whole system appearing to collapse. The phone number is 802-698-3000. Please write that down if you will. 802-698-3000. That's only for what appears to be a system-wide failure. So now we will invite you who wish to speak to the select board's articles, and only to them, to raise your hand electronically, and we'll do our best to capture those that information, get your name, make a list, and then when we have the list, I will call upon you in order. So I'm going to take a minute for you to get your hands up, and for my colleagues here to start building the list.
Only have 4. Oh, somebody.
Did you say Anne?
Yeah.
Looks like 4, right?
So far, we see 4 folks who wish to be heard. Before we begin that, let me outline for you some ground rules that we ask you to honor. First of all are welcome to speak, but of course only when recognized by the moderator. Recognizing doesn't mean I know your face or something. It means that I've seen your name and I call it. And if you want to speak, you need to go through this process we've just described. All residents of town, whether they're registered voters or not, are welcome to be speaking. And it is our custom here in Norwich to welcome statements by folks who are not residents of town, but who have an interest in our business. Under the law, it's possible to deny them access, but it has not been our custom to do so. For example, when we get to the appropriations to individual nonprofit organizations, we sometimes invite advocates or representatives of those nonprofits, some of whom are not residents of this town, to speak. But similarly, as we've just seen, we invite members of the General Assembly, some of whom or all of whom are not residents of this town, are welcome to speak to us. So our general rule is to welcome contributions from folks who are not residents of this town, so long as they abide by all of the conventions that apply to all the rest of us. And I want to go over those with you. First of all, please speak only about the articles just presented. And please direct your comments not to the select board in this case, but to me, the moderator. Address yourself to me. And if you have a question, I will turn to the appropriate member of the select board and invite them to respond. Second or third, I've lost track, please speak only for yourself. Please do not attempt to represent anyone else. This is, after all, direct democracy. This is the moment when we, the residents, get the opportunity to speak and to influence. But it is not appropriate to claim that you represent anyone else. As you speak, you may comment upon the actions or inactions of town boards in connection with the articles at hand, the 12 select board articles in this case. But please do not speak about individual members of those boards or any individual members of commissions or any other town entities, nor of individual town officers or employees, or of any other individual persons. And then, by long-standing tradition, at this annual information meeting, we do not speak about any candidates for office in connection with their candidacy, for, against, or in any comment about folks who are candidates for office. So with those guidelines in mind, I see that we have a list of, I think, 4 townspeople. And after that, when I will invite you to speak, you will have 2 minutes. We are timing you, and I will regrettably interrupt you if you go beyond 2 minutes. It's not my idea of fun, but you can make things go better if you stay with 2 minutes. We will then hear from another member of the General Assembly. So we begin with Cheryl Lindbergh. You are recognized.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Appreciate it. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. And I would like to speak to the Article 7 in particular, but I would first like to thank the Select Board for the clarity with which they've written the subsequent articles requesting reserve funds and what they will be spent for. Those are the types of reserve funds that we should be voting on, and the clarity of those allows the individual to vote knowing what they'll be spent on specifically. With regard to Article 7, I am very concerned about it because it concerns me in that this board may know what they would like to spend that on, but future boards may interpret this article very differently. With that said, with our recent audit and our auditor speaking to the Select Board, she was very pleased with an unassigned fund balance of the $1 million plus. And what can then happen each year when the audit is complete is that the Select Board can then request from the unassigned fund balance an amount on an article at the next town meeting where they would like people to vote on to spend that money. It could be to, as people are saying, buy down the tax rate, which is not a bad thing because it's a surplus. But it is an amount we should maintain at a certain level, but we do not need to take those types of dollars and put them in a reserve fund for the Select Board only to spend for future purposes that are not clearly identified in this article.
Thank you, Ms. Lindbergh. Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Omer Trayman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have a question for you that I hope you could direct to the Select Board. Sure. I'm interested, should Articles 7 and 8 both pass, what will the remaining balance in the unrestricted fund be at that point in time? And
thank you for the question, Mr. Trayman. Chairman Arnold, would you please respond to the question?
Yes, with an estimate, Omar, with forgiveness, I don't have the auditor's report in front of me, but I believe there will be approximately 200,000 left in the unassigned funds. So we made decision. We're moving. The movement is a result of our knowledge from the previous fiscal year, without having the auditor's report before our decision. But that report did come in under the statutory deadline, but not in time to inform our budget decision. Okay. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. The chair will now recognize Mr. John Felder. Please unmute, give your name, and identify the article to which you wish to speak.
Sure. So I'm John Feldy. I live on Koch Road here in Norwich. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me this time. I want to ask voters to vote yes on Article 9, the warrant Article 9. Part of the hiring process after Chief Frank left in 2020 was to survey the community regarding a new police chief. That survey of public opinion was in 2020 and showed that townspeople are concerned with how policing fits into a broad picture of public safety. Some criticized the size and cost of the police department. Others feared cuts. Some complained about too many traffic stops. Others worried that speeders endangered the community. The range of opinions about most safety issues in the region was wide, including issues of drug abuse, mental health, and racism, which were not addressed in 2007, as well as community policing and traffic safety. The 2007 study focused on conduct of the police. It was a useful report with a strong citizen input that answered questions the public had at that time. I am not in support of redundancy. The survey of 2020 showed much broader concerns, and the role of police has evolved over the last decades. In one respect, the 2021 proposal addresses the issue of accountability directly by examining the scope of 911 calls. This is useful to determine whether agencies other than the police might respond. It would be useful to have consultants with experience in conflict resolution, policing, and public safety to help our community explore its needs in a constructive way. Who knows? It might even help as this town prepares to negotiate with another outside group.
Mr. Felder, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, the New England Police Benevolent Association. As for the expense of the study, it's understandable that the town can make a one-time investment of $50,000 to guide the path for effective spending on public safety for the future. Thank you, and I hope you'll vote for warrant Article 9.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Felder. Next, we will hear from Irv Tomei. Mr. Tomei.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to try to cover two topics in 2 minutes. First, with respect to an article, I have a question for the select board about Article 7. I am familiar with the process which has occurred every summer, wherein the select board looks at the actual leftover funds at the end of the fiscal year and makes a judgment call as to how much needs to be kept in the unreserved fund balance and how much may be used perhaps to reduce the tax rate. What is not clear to me from the description of the new fund is whether this replaces that process or not. I think I understand English, but I remain bewildered. Before I get my answer, that is my question. But I would like to mention my other point, Mr. Moderator.
Certainly.
It seems to me, sir, that you have decreed a process for this meeting whereas previously it would be possible for a citizen to speak to 2 or 3 articles that were select board articles. Now we are confined to 2 minutes total for all the select board articles as a group. Is that your intention? If so, that is significant change to public access to speak to each other.
Thank you for that. So I will now invite the chair of the select board, Mr. Arnold, to respond to your question.
Sure. So, just to be really quick, the proposed reserve fund is a a correct enactment of the existing master financial policy, but according to statute. So just to be clear on that, the process of sort of where the board looks at an unassigned balance or surplus and then convenes in July to set the tax rate and then use that surplus to buy down the tax rate is against model policy from BLCT and other agencies. It states it right in their model policy not to do it. There are some consequences of that, that if that Claudette Brochu has spoken about. And also you're doing that without voter authorization, right? So you can, through the mechanisms of town meeting, you can use a surplus to propose to the voters to as part of your operating budget, but not in July. That was not a practice that's recommended. So if Mr. Moderator would allow, I can turn to Claudette Brochu and explain. I've heard her explain some negative consequences as a result of that in the past that she's researched, if she doesn't mind being put on the spot and you would allow her to speak.
Mr. Tomei, would you wish to have that explanation?
Yes, please.
Please go ahead, Ms. Brochu.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So from what I have understood is if you reduce the tax rate, then you are subsequently reducing your revenue. And if you reduce your revenue to the point where you can't fund your operations, then it's kind of, that's the argument. Reducing your tax rate is actually reducing your revenue.
And also, and just to be clear, follow up, it's outside of the mechanisms of town meeting where you could ask the voters to, as others have said, to make decisions on a surplus, but the board shouldn't, as we see from model policy, act alone in that in July come the tax rate setting. Okay, does that answer the question to the questioner, Mr. Moderator?
Very briefly.
Very nearly. But does this mean then that if more money had been raised in year X than turned out to be needed, in year X plus 1, the voters could consider whether to reduce the tax rate in year X plus 2 in order to return that surplus revenue to the taxpayers, or can they return it? Can they vote to return it in year X plus 1? I'm still confused about that. Sorry.
Roger, I can actually try to answer.
If the Mr. Moderator would allow, yes.
Very briefly, please.
What I would suggest is that with those surplus funds, we can actually work on reducing the funds needed to be raised by taxes to fund operations in the subsequent year.
Right.
That would be my goal. And we would do that in the budget process.
Right.
So knowing that we had X number of dollars in unspent funds, we could then either increase allocations to reserve funds or increase line item operational funds.
Right.
Where we reduce the amount of money needed to be raised by taxes in the next year.
It appears that you've answered Mr. Tomei's question. Thank you for the question, Mr. Tomei. We'll now move on. I see two more hands, Pamela Smith and Don McCabe. But before your hands were up, we were notified of the presence of another member of our legislative delegation, Senator Allison Clarkson, who's been waiting in the wings. And I would like to recognize Senator Clarkson for a very brief commentary. Good evening, Senator Clarkson.
Good evening, Senator Carroll. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for welcoming us and actually inviting us. So I'm touched. I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm one of your 3 state senators. Alice Nitka and Dick McCormick we represent 26 towns in the Windsor district, and they're taking other town meetings tonight. And I am here in Chester, having done the Chester town meeting, and it's great to be with you. I represent you in the Senate as Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and on Government Operations. and I'm honored to be the majority leader of the Senate. This year, I'm also serving on the reapportionment committee. I'm sure Tim and Jim spoke to this already, but our challenge in the Senate is to reapportion equitably and as much as possible by county line. The good news is Vermont gained population, which is terrific. The bad news is most of it was in the Northwest. So we are having to juggle a bit to maintain both integrity and equity. So it's a juggling act, but it's a tripartisan group, and we're doing, I think, a reasonably good job of working together. Our priorities in the Senate are probably not unlike the House: housing, workforce development, climate change mitigation, and the ongoing COVID response. We have a bunch of have-tos in addition to reapportionment. We have the pension sustainability work. We have to address equities in the weighting formula for education finance, our budget, of course, and the constitutional amendments, which I assume Tim and Jim spoke to. Proposition 2, improving the language for slavery in our Constitution so that it clarifies that all people, we prohibit everyone from being enslaved, not just those 21 and older. And of course, Prop 5, which is our ensures and would enshrine reproductive liberty into our Vermont Constitution. Vermont's COVID money recovering money is having significant impacts on our ability to finance priorities we would only have been able to dream of years ago. $3.56 billion have flowed into Vermont and Vermonters, businesses, and our towns. And we're taking full advantage, investing in childcare, housing, community infrastructure, transformational regional capital investments, education, workforce development, internet connectivity, Irvin's always happy to hear that, and climate change mitigation. Our housing crisis, we are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into our housing crisis. Here in the Upper Valley, we could do with 7,500 new housing units tomorrow, but we're going to get there somehow, slowly but surely. Our focus is on increasing housing density and reducing barriers to develop in our downtowns and village centers. This work includes improving rental housing health and safety, getting new and renovated property units into the market as fast as possible, and that's through our VHIP program, our Vermont Housing Incentive Program, which takes vacant, blighted, and non-code compliant properties and upgrades them and gets them back online fast. And to Norwich and Woodstock, in many ways, the accessory dwelling unit option of enabling our overhoused, those of us who are in houses that are maybe too big and would like to create an accessory dwelling unit, we're incenting that work. We are also streamlining the permitting process, continuing our bylaw modernization and improving our mobile home parks, and creating a first-generation home buyer program, which is exciting. We continue to support economic recovery for our COVID's hardest hit business sectors, our hospitality, our special events, and our creative sector. We're making capital investments in projects with significant regional impact, and we're cleaning up all those contaminated brownfields, which until they're cleaned up, we can't do much with them. And we're making strategic investments in upskilling our workforce. So as I end, I just want to highlight one thing that we've done that just makes me so proud to be a Vermonter. It's hard to choose because so much is going on, but a major accomplishment of the session so far is the agreement we've come to about our public pension system, making it sustainable into the future. This agreement protects the public pension system, saves the taxpayers $2 billion in the next few years, and maintains the defined benefit. And it was a great example of Vermonters coming together from polar opposite opinions, working together, coming to trust each other, and coming into an agreement which benefits all Vermonters. So I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. I love being here, and I treasure this opportunity to serve you, and it's a great privilege. Thank you so much.
Senator Clarkson, thanks so much for being with us. It's nice to see you again. Thank you. And now we return to questions about the 12 articles of the Select Board, and we now seem to have 4 speakers on the list. As speakers, please do remember that you're asked to please give your name. We don't need your address. Please identify the article that you will be speaking to, and please limit yourself to 2 minutes. I know it's terribly brief, but otherwise we're on schedule to end at 10 o'clock, and we need to keep things moving. Thank you. Now, the chair recognizes Pamela Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My question is about Article 10. Last summer, the Select Board decided not to go ahead with this project, phases 2 and 3, because it came in at $1.2 million. And then we heard in January on the 12th that these costs could be 2 to 3 times that amount. And so I'm wondering, since this is a front-funded project, how the board would fund this project and then wait for the reimbursement. That's my first question. My second question is that this has been, Article 10 has been presented as doing phase 2 separately from phase 3. And I'm just wondering, are we paying for 100% of the cost of phase 2? And then would we have to pay again if we were to file a grant application with the state for the Vermont VTrans bike ped program? So I'm wondering if we would pay twice.
Fine. Very good questions. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Mr. Arnold, would you respond, please?
Sure. So the language of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, the origin of that is in a VTrans grant program, right? So for arguably the most popular program for projects like this. And so phase 1 we participated in for a study from Dubois and King. And then we were assuming that we would be able to move on to a distinct phase 2 that in fact would look at some of the engineering questions and other matters that would come from that phase 1. But the grant program required, and that phase 2 was required to have a phase 3 of construction. So what this is essentially is a local effort raised through, is a local Norwich effort to have a phase 2. And the only thing that is different from sort of the dates that Ms. Smith alluded to is that we want to put it into, we have the opportunity to put it into a wider context with our town plan action items. If we were to proceed with a phase 3 under the terms of this VTrans grant program, it would be an 80-20 split. And the finding of the study would not be wasted. It would inform the future work, right? So, and then part of the board's desire to have a distinct phase 2 and not proceed immediately to construction was a result of not being sure completely to be able to propose to the voters what the 80-20 monies were. The project could range from anywhere from $300,000 to $600,000, and we wanted to be able to ask the voters with more information. And so we hope that phase 2 is a commitment to bike ped facilities, as well as additional exploration. And quite frankly, we should be very thankful to all of our residents for all of their grassroots efforts in centering this interest to us. Okay.
Thank you very much for your response.
Mr. Moderator, I don't feel that all of my questions were answered. The question of front funding was not answered. And also, I don't understand the $300,000 to $600,000. The feasibility study said $1.2 million. Our town manager on January 12th said the project, because of cost increases, could come in at 2 to 3 times that amount. So those issues were not addressed in the response.
All right, thank you for that further question.
Mr. Moderator, I was answering questions about what the $50,000.
If you could respond to those questions very briefly in a minute.
Sure. So I will say that the $50,000 is an estimated cost, and our local estimated cost to solve the answers of that. We've previously expended some funds for the phase 1 study that I believe were phase one study, and that ultimately it would be 600K is 20 on a $3 million project. It's an 80-20 match grant. I can't confirm the numbers because part of what phase two does is get these hard numbers. So I don't know if that is helpful. I'm certainly not trying to duck Ms. Smith's question.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Excuse me. We'll now move on to Don McCabe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Don McCabe, Meeting House Road. I just wanted to make a very brief point talking about money. There is $16,000 plus in a fund, it's either a special or a designated fund, to build a bridge, not across the Connecticut River, but across Blood Brook, to get the west side of Norwich kids and adults to the east side. It's called the Kids Bridge. Thank you to everyone who's watching and to everyone in town who has donated to this fund. It's supposed to be self-paid, not any money from the town, and it's supposed to benefit kids and families. I hope it happens soon. We have been waiting a very long time, over 2 years, for this project to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCabe. And I think, oh yes, Mr. Warner, you are next and last. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I don't need 2 minutes. I just wanted to speak strongly in favor of Article 10, and I appreciate the board and the way they're addressing the issue of pedestrian safety and walkability in Norwich, in particular Beaver Meadow, but all across Norwich. People have often been talking throughout many years about pedestrian safety, and Article 10 goes a way towards addressing it, as opposed to the status quo, which would keep things the same. I'm interested to see what the results of the study are, and then if they are appropriate, to go forward and perhaps apply for the V-Trans grant. But I want to emphatically say that I think that moving forward and addressing this issue is part of this warrant, and I very much appreciate the board addressing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orner. That concludes our comments and questions regarding the select board's articles. And we'll now move on to the school board's articles. There are 3 of them, and the chair recognizes the chair of the Norwich Town School Board, Mr. Condon, to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you all for being here this evening. I'd like to begin by quickly introducing myself and my fellow board members, as well as our district administrators here with us tonight. As John mentioned, I'm Tom Condon, currently the chair of the Norwich School Board. Lisa Christie is our vice chair, and our other members include Lily Tryman, Garrett Palm, and Neil Odell, who you'll hear from soon with regard to the major budget portion of our presentation this evening. Our administrators with us tonight include Superintendent Jay Badams, Business Administrator Jane Teague, and our Marion Cross School Principal Sean Gagne. And before moving on to our business this evening, I did want to extend thanks to my colleagues on the board and the work of our administrators, faculty, and staff who've done an incredible job of providing for our children throughout the past 2 years of this pandemic. And finally, I'd like to thank Kelly Hersey, who stepped down from the board in October after serving for 6 years, including as chair of the SAU 70 board at the end of her tenure. And now, as Mr. Moderator noted, I'll speak very briefly to a couple of articles, 39 and 40, before turning it over to Neil for the main budget presentation of Article 41. And Mr. Moderator, would you like me just to read through 39 and 40 and address them on their own?
However you wish.
That's fine. So Article 39 is to authorize the Board of School Directors to borrow money by issuance of bonds or notes not in excess of anticipated revenues for the next fiscal year in accordance with the provision of 16 VSA SB 629. The purpose of this article is to provide the school district with authorization to borrow money to cover necessary expenditures in the event that school district tax revenues are not received in a timely manner. And that is the only case there. Article 40 is simply an article, warrant, with regard to setting the school board member's salary at $500 for the year. This is an amount that I don't believe has changed at least in 10 years and has been on your ballots for at least that long a period of time. And so keeping my comments very short there, Mr. Moderator, with those two articles and our introductions, I'm happy to now turn it over to my colleague on the board and on our Norwich School Budget Committee, Neil Odell, who's going to present and share a presentation from his laptop on Article 41, the school budget.
All right, thank you very much. I want to start by saying, I've been doing these school budget presentations at town meeting now for about 7 years. And over the years, I've approached the budget presentation from a variety of different angles. Each time I was hoping that I was addressing the items that all of you needed to know in order to make an informed vote. The reality is that the Vermont education funding formula is complex. It took me about 7 years before I really felt like I understood it. Couple that with our status as an interstate school district, and it gets even more confusing. I'm going to try my best tonight to explain things, but I also believe that the moderator will allow time at the end if you have any questions. And I do think that these emojis are going to make more sense by the end of the presentation. So let's start tonight at the very end with the number that you're all really interested in, the forecasted tax rates. At this moment in time, we believe that these are the worst case scenarios for the tax rate, and later on this evening, I'll explain why we think that. The homestead property tax rate could increase by as much as 11.96 cents to $1.9821. And similarly, the income sensitivity rate could increase to 2.8% or a 0.04 percentage point increase. Okay. So those are the forecasted tax rates, but how do we get to those numbers? At a high level, the property tax rate calculation relies on 6 factors. The first is the MCS budget, which is the amount of money it costs to serve our students in grades pre-K through 6. The second is the Dresden budget, the amount of money necessary to run both the RMS Middle School and the Hanover High School students in grades 7 through 12. The third is the percentage split of Norwich and Hanover students in Dresden. This percentage split determines the amount of the Dresden budget that is assessed to Norwich. Fourth is the number of equalized pupils. Equalized pupils is calculated by the Vermont Agency of Education and is intended to recognize differing costs for different categories of students. Fifth is the yield numbers. We'll cover the yield numbers a little later in the presentation, but for now you should know that they're determined by the legislature and are in part dependent on the health of the education fund. Last is the common level of appraisal, which is a means of adjusting property values. This ratio is determined by comparing the grand list value to the sale price for all of the arm's length sales that occurred in the town over the prior 3-year period. So let's take a look at each of these items in a little bit more detail. First, the MCS budget, the Marion Cross budget. We are presenting for your approval a budget for the Marion Cross Elementary School of $6,621,180. This is an increase of $412,637 or 6.65%. But let's take a look at what is, and almost importantly, what isn't included in the Marion Cross budget. First, what isn't in this budget? We have yet to settle with the support staff on a contract covering both last year and this year. The pandemic has exacerbated issues with scheduling and hampered our progress, but just this past week, we believe that we are close to a deal. The budget does include the regular annual step and track increases, but it does not include any negotiated increase to the salary schedule. Additionally, the budget does not include any negotiated settlement with the teachers. Those negotiation sessions continue, and we are hopeful that we'll have a settlement by the end of the school year. Just like the support staff, the proposed budget does include anticipated step and track increases for teachers, but it does not include any negotiated agreement on overall salary increases. So what notable items are in the budget? Well, due to overwhelming demand, we are going to double the size of our pre-K program next year, providing space for an additional 18 students. In addition to that, we anticipate an additional 8 students in grades K through 6. We continue to evaluate and adjust the staffing model at MCS to best meet student need. We'll cover the details in a subsequent slide, but for now, the big picture is that we're looking at an overall decrease in personnel for next year. Special education, which can be a volatile component of education spending, is actually projected to be down slightly next year, this based on student need. Healthcare benefits, which really comprise a significant portion of the budget, those are now negotiated at the state level, and they continue to be a concern for us. Analysis shows that the low premiums and out-of-pocket costs for employees are driving utilization, and that utilization is actually pushing up the cost of the plans. One of the reasons for moving to a statewide benefit was to address the ever-increasing cost of healthcare, but we've now completed 2 rounds of bargaining, both of them ending in arbitration, and so far we've actually seen minimal progress on cost containment. Finally, as a lot of people know, we continue to work through the potential remedies for the MCS septic system, but at this stage, we haven't determined a final solution, and that is not included in this proposed budget. So the 2 items in the budget that can have a really significant impact are enrollment and staffing. Enrollment's important because equalized pupil counts have a large impact on the education property tax rate. And staffing is important because salaries and benefits are the single biggest cost factor in the district. Our enrollments this year were actually greater than we forecast. On October 1, we had 311 students, which was actually 9 more than we had forecast. For next year, we're anticipating an increase of 26 students over that October 1 count. The biggest source, like I said previously, is our pre-K program, where demand remains high. We're going to double our capacity there, adding another 18 students for next year. And in addition, enrollment in K through 6 is expected to be up 8 students. When it comes to staffing, we use a term FTE, which stands for full-time equivalent. 1.0 FTE is a full-time employee. Likewise, a 0.5 FTE is a half-time employee. So for next year, we're planning a reduction in total staffing from 55.1 to 54 FTEs. And while this is a reduction in overall staffing, you'll notice later on in the presentation that the total salary and benefits costs are actually going up. This is because of a shift in our staff distribution. We're increasing regular classroom teachers, but decreasing ed assistants, a tech position, and some special education FTEs. So as we look towards next year, we're actually projecting 2 sections in pre-K and 2nd grade, and are planning for 3 sections in all of the other grades. You may be wondering why we're showing 3 sections in kindergarten with only 35 students. Our method for projecting future class sizes is based on historical trends, and while it is quite accurate, in the case of kindergarten, we actually believe that we'll have closer to 42 students rather than 35, based on what we know about the current existing pre-K population. So the expenditure budget in graph format, what we see from this view of the expenditure budget is how much budget money is actually devoted to regular and special education, almost all in the form of teacher salaries and benefits. Those 2 categories combined cover 64% of the expenditure budget, but let's take a look at the proposed expenditures for next year. From this graph, we can see that regular education costs are up next year. This is due to a shift in the staffing that I had mentioned previously. In addition to that, we've got new textbooks for literacy and math instruction, as well as new educational software. The technology area is increasing by about $30,000 as we begin a scheduled replacement of older technology hardware. School administration area is up due to retiree benefit cost increases and election changes in healthcare benefits. And the operation of maintenance and plant is up, but you'll also see similarly that the amount for site and building improvements is down. This is just representing a switch of where we're accounting for the costs associated with pumping out the septic tanks at Marion Cross. On the revenue side of things, the biggest change here is actually related to special education. In 2018, the legislature passed Act 173 that shifted the reimbursement model for special education to a census-based block grant. Transition to this model is actually still underway, and exact funding amounts are still being worked out. But at this moment, we are projecting that we'll receive just over $851,000 from the new census block grant, which supplants the anticipated loss of just over $778,000 from the special education block grant and the special education expense reimbursement. Overall, revenue is actually up $192,345 from last year, or an increase of 15.26%. So that covers the MCS expenditure budget. Item number 2 contributing to the tax rate is actually the Dresden budget. We're not going to go into details on the Dresden budget tonight. That was covered actually in a separate presentation that was held on Thursday of last week, but I did want to give you a high-level overview of things. There are a few components to the Dresden budget this year. First is the Dresden expenditure budget, coming in at $29,795,508. That's up 5.64%. Now, unlike in Vermont, in New Hampshire, the costs associated with negotiated settlements with the teachers and the support staff are actually voted on as separate warrant articles. The amounts listed here then are considered add-ons to the Dresden budget if they are approved by voters. Finally is the net assessment, the Dresden expenditure budget less any offsetting revenues, which is then assigned to Norwich and Hanover. This year, due primarily to an expected loss in revenue, the net assessment is up over 15%. The other associated issue with Dresden is actually how we determine Norwich's portion of the assessment. So the Dresden net assessment to Norwich is based on the prior 3-year average of the number of Norwich and Hanover students at the middle and the high school. This year, that percentage shifted slightly in favor of Norwich, with a slightly larger percentage of Hanover students in total. This shift, that's combined with the factors on the previous slide, results in a 12% increase of the Dresden assessment to Norwich from last year. Next up is equalized pupils. And as you heard from some other folks this evening, this is actually an important point. Education spending per equalized pupil is the basis for education property taxation in Vermont. Equalized pupils are determined by the Agency of Education by applying a different weight to students in different categories, recognizing that the cost for educating certain students is greater or less than others. Examples of these factors include English language learners and economically disadvantaged students. This weighted student count is used as the denominator in determining education spending per pupil. In the past few years, this equalized pupil count has been a source of great frustration for the school board, and this year in particular, it was really frustrating. We look at several factors when setting the budget, but one of these key numbers is the equalized pupil count, since it can have such a dramatic impact on the tax rate. At the beginning of budgeting, we received an equalized pupil count of 629.02 students. And all throughout the budgeting process, we used that number. Going into our final budget meeting, that equalized pupil count had us looking at a 3.64% increase in the tax rate. An hour and a half before our final budget meeting, where we needed to finalize the budget, we were provided with the new number, 612.60. It was a loss of 16.42 equalized pupils. That one change, with no other spending changes, caused the estimated tax rate to increase to nearly double. Remember this point. I'm going to come back to it later on in the presentation. The next item in our list of factors that influence the tax rate is the yield number. But in order for that to make a little bit more sense, I first want to talk about the sources of revenue to the education fund. What you're looking at here is the general proportionality for revenue sources to the education fund. And you can see from this chart that it's actually not all property taxes. The Ed Fund receives 100% of the sales and use tax in Vermont, 25% of the rooms and meals tax, a third of the purchase and use tax, and all of the lottery revenues. The remainder comes primarily from the non-homestead and homestead property taxes. So when one or all of those consumption-based taxes runs short, the balance actually needs to be made up in other areas like the property tax. This is where the yield number comes into play. By definition, the property yield number is the amount of per pupil spending that a $1 tax rate will generate. And the income yield number is the amount of per pupil spending that a 2% income tax rate will generate. So if your district spends more than that amount, your tax rate will be higher than $1. Every year on December 1, the tax commissioner issues the December 1st tax letter, and that estimates what the property yield number could be. That forecasted number is based on the health of the education fund, as well as an estimate of what school districts are likely to budget for and spend in the upcoming budget season. This year, due to a $90 million undesignated surplus in the Ed Fund, the tax commissioner actually shared two different potential yield numbers. If the state were to use none of the surplus funds, the tax commissioner estimated a property yield number of $12,937 and an income yield number of $15,484. Using those yield numbers gives you the tax rate estimates that I provided at the very beginning of the presentation, $1.9821 and 2.8%. But the tax commissioner also estimated yield numbers if all of the $90 million surplus were used to lower taxes. Those numbers are $13,846 for the property yield and $16,705 for the income yield number. So how much of a difference would these yield numbers actually make for Norwich? Well, it's actually pretty significant. So as I had mentioned earlier, with the lower property yield number, using no surplus revenue against taxes, the property tax rate in Norwich is estimated to be $1.9821. If all of that revenue were to be applied to property taxes, we'd actually be looking at a property tax decrease of just over a penny, $1.8519. Similarly, the income sensitivity rate would drop from last year from 2.76% to 2.59%. So far, the governor has signaled that he'd like to see half of that 90 million used to lower taxes. If that ends up happening, we'd be looking at the following tax rates. It's due to these potential differences in the yield numbers that I began tonight saying that I feel that $1.9821 is actually the worst case scenario. The final numbers will be set by the legislature, and they're going to need to determine how much, if any, of the surplus amount will be used against taxes. The final factor in the tax rate calculation is the adjustment of the equalized homestead tax rate by the common level of appraisal, a measure designed to adjust the property values based on recent home sales. And for the third year in a row, the CLA has dropped, this time almost 6 percentage points to 84.39%. And because this figure is used in the denominator of the tax rate calculation, a decrease pushes the tax rate up significantly. I think it's worth noting that if you actually take a look at the unadjusted tax rates from the past several years, you'll see that before the application of the CLA, the Norwich tax rate has been decreasing since FY19. And this year, you can see that the CLA has a significant impact on the tax rate. Applying the CLA adds almost 31 cents to the unadjusted tax rate. All right, so we made it this far. Let's take a look at the property tax rate calculation. So here's the formula. We take per pupil spending and divide that by the property dollar equivalent yield. This gets multiplied by the statewide homestead rate of $1 to give us our equalized tax rate. Finally, we divide that by the CLA to give us our local tax rate. Similarly, with the income sensitivity calculation, we take per pupil spending, divide that by the income dollar equivalent yield, and then multiply that by the fixed income rate of 2% to get the income tax rate. So let's look at the tax rate calculation in detail with our numbers. We take the Norwich budget, we add to that the Dresden assessment to get total expenditures. We then subtract out revenues to get net ed spending. Then we divide that number by the number of equalized pupils to get our net ed spending per equalized pupil. We then divide that by the yield number to give the equalized homestead tax rate. Finally, we divide that by the CLA to get our final estimated homestead tax rate. For the income sensitivity calculation, we divide the income yield number and then multiply by 2%. Earlier in the presentation, I showed you how our equalized pupil count changed at the 11th hour and that it had a significant impact on the tax rate. So what if that equalized pupil count hadn't changed? If it had remained at 629.02, our estimated homestead tax rate would be $1.93. And instead of an 11-cent tax rate increase from last year, we'd be looking at an increase under 7 cents. There's another reason why we focus a lot on equalized pupils, and that's the possible implementation of new pupil weighting factors. So back in 2018, the legislature commissioned a study on the existing student weighting formula. The study was released in 2019 and recommends sweeping changes to the current formula. The new weights take into account poverty, student needs, school size, and population density. And these are not surprisingly all boxes that Norwich doesn't necessarily tick. The potential impact to Norwich is actually quite significant. Our number of equalized pupils could drop significantly. Over last summer, a legislative task force worked to develop recommendations to the legislature for implementation of the weights. They proposed 2 different models that are being debated in several different committees in both the House and the Senate during this session. It's too early to know what the exact outcome will be for Norwich, but the estimates indicate that we could see a tax rate increase of almost a third. So we on the Norwich School Board have been keeping a close eye on things and in close contact with our representatives and senators on this topic, and Chair Condon recently testified in the Senate Finance Committee regarding the potential impact to Norwich. In the coming weeks, we'll be increasing our efforts on this topic and be providing informational sessions for Norwich residents that would like to stay engaged on this topic. So that wraps up the 6 items that can impact our tax rate. And we've covered the budget and the tax rate calculation, but we haven't talked about how Marion Cross and, more importantly, our students are doing. And actually, by many measures, we're actually doing quite well, despite even the pandemic. Here are just two examples. Standard assessments don't always show the full picture, but they can provide a snapshot. Looking at the SBAC scores, and the SBAC is a standardized test that we use in Vermont. In English language arts over the past few years, you can see that the percentage of Marion Cross students scoring proficient and above is actually significantly higher than the state average. Likewise, the numbers for math look very similar. So with that, I wanted to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Principal Sean Gagna and all of the teachers, the support staff, the custodial staff, and the volunteers at Marion Cross for all of your hard work and your effort. In some respects, I think this last year has been actually more difficult than the year before that. I want to say thank you to Superintendent Jay Badams for your leadership. Thank you to Business Administrator Jamie Teague for all of the work that she put into the budgeting process. Thank you to my fellow board members who spend a lot of time on all of this work. And finally, thanks to all of you for supporting Marion Cross and the Dresden School District. None of this would be possible without you folks. Mr. Moderator, I will defer to you for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Odell. As in the past, your presentation is wonderfully lucid and well-informed. And yet I hope there's not an examination this evening on all that you said. It's an incredibly arcane system that we use for funding school aid, as you know better than any of us. I think we're very fortunate to have school board members like Mr. Odell and Mr. Condon, who are, first of all, very experienced and been on the board for a long time, and also very knowledgeable, and I might mention very well respected around the state. We now will invite members of the public to raise their hand. I see that the business manager has raised her hand. As a rule, at this point, the school board presentation is completed, and we would expect now to hear from townspeople with comments or questions. So if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand, and very shortly we will get to you with a list. Just to remind you, anyone who is a Norwich resident may speak. Please confine your remarks or questions to the articles just presented by the school board. Remember that you may speak only once about questions posed related to the school board's presentation, even if you've already spoken about the select board. Are we ready? Do we have any more names coming in? Okay, we appear to have three questioners. Ms. Teague, I'm going to wait since you are staff, and we'll have you wrap up at the end. It will start, however, with Robert Leeton. Please, Mr. Leeton, you have 2 minutes. You're muted, Mr. Leeton. Please unmute. Mr. Leeton, you're still muted.
Okay, now hearing me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Sorry. I have a brief question. One is just to compliment that presentation, which was just very impressive. But I have a historical question that I hope you see as a neutral question. Has Norwich historically ever voted down a school budget?
Is that your question, Mr. Leeton?
That's my question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Condon, would you respond?
Either I or Neil could. I can say that in my time in Norwich, I do not recall it ever having been voted down, and that is 14 years. That's as far back as I go in Norwich.
Thank you very much. Our next question or comment is from Claudette Brochu. Ms. Brochu?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Claudette Brochu. Just wanting a little bit more clarification on how the Dresden assessment is performed or done or calculated.
Mr. Condon, do you wish to respond?
I think, Neil, if you don't mind, you want to just go into what you presented on the Dresden assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I can. So, Claudette, I'm not entirely sure I know what you're looking for, but you take the Dresden expenditure budget in a case like this year where we have a couple of warrant articles on the Dresden ballot related to negotiated settlements with our teacher and support staff unions. If those articles are approved, they would get added to the Dresden expenditure budget. You take away from that any revenues. That leaves you with a net assessment, and then we allocate that net assessment, as I had mentioned before, based on the percentage split between Norwich students and Hanover students in the Dresden School District, and that determines the allocation to both Norwich and Hanover.
Thank you very much for that response. Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment or pose a question to the school board? I see Marcia Calloway's. Ms. Calloway.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Ms. Calloway.
Can you hear me?
Okay. I found this on the web for I see Marcia Calloway's hands up me.
No, I don't. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. 1 second. So, Mr. Odell, if I can address a question to Mr. Odell, I'm just wondering if we can know about how similar towns to Norwich have fared, if you know, given what's happened with the pandemic and the housing crisis and the CLA and people needing to do town-wide reassessments.
I unfortunately do not have that information. I'm not familiar with what other towns are experiencing in regards to, housing sales and then the resulting impact on their local CLAs.
I'm afraid I don't know either, Marcia. Sorry.
I will indicate though that information is available. I know that I think you can get it from probably the Department of Tax's website because I have seen it. I just don't have it with me currently.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Ms. Teague, we, I think, have time now for your 2 minutes. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Moderator Carroll, and thank you to all my board members who are just amazing people. I just wanted to point out one small item in case somebody reads through their brochures and then, takes a look at Neil's wonderful presentation. The excess spending penalty, which used to be in play if you went over a certain dollar amount, was initially added to our projections. So the information that Neil is bringing you tonight in the projections is actually a penny less than some of the projections we had run that you will see in your brochure. So I just wanted to point that out in case somebody read through and said, well, why is it $1.98 instead of $1.99? And that is why, is because this year, the excess spending penalties have again been suspended by the state legislature. So it helped us out because we had been slightly over, assuming all warrant articles at Dresden pass. We would have been over by $96, but that's been suspended again for, I think, indefinitely while they work out the different weighting study. So I just wanted to make folks aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Teague. Very helpful. At this point, I believe we've created an opportunity for all members of the community who wish to comment or question the school board. And so I believe we're done with the articles presented by the school board. I want to thank all of the members of the school board for their work and for the presentation by the chair, Mr. Odell. We'll now move on to the next group of articles on the warrant. You'll remember that there are, thank you. Before we do that, I'm informed that the other member of our delegation in the House of Representatives, Tim Briglin, is on the line and available. And Representative Briglin, we welcome you to this meeting, and we invite you to speak briefly to the gathering. Thank you. You still seem to be muted, Mr. Briglin. We're not able to hear you, Mr. Briglin. Still not. If you'd like, we can come back to you in 5 or 10 minutes, if you can bear with us. We'll do whatever we can at this end to address your technical problem. And so now, we will move on to the third large cluster of articles. It's the largest group. It's 22 articles. They have one thing in common. They are proposed appropriations from the select board's budgets, from the town budget, appropriations that would be granted to a wide variety of not-for-profit organizations, some of which are located here in town, but many of which are located or headquartered elsewhere, but all of which, it is asserted, benefit the citizens of the town of Norwich. And for that reason, the select board has granted them the opportunity to have an article on the warrant requesting approval. I hope you have the warrant in front of you, because I don't think we have time for me to read them all to you, but a good example might be Article 24. Shall the voters appropriate $3,500 to the Norwich Lions Club to be used to underwrite the fireworks for the Norwich Fair in celebration of the 260 year of the town's charter? That's an example of a not-for-profit here in town. Another, it might be Article 33, shall the voters appropriate $5,300 to the White River Council on Aging to be used for home-delivered meals, transport, and social service, keeping in mind that those services do benefit residents of the town. Before we go to the next stage with this, I just have received notice that Representative Briglin has been able to restore his microphone. And if you can hear us, yes, Mr. Briglin, please proceed.
Can you hear me, John?
We can indeed. Thank you.
Okay, I beg your pardon. As the chair of the technology committee in the House, it's with a little embarrassment that I couldn't unmute myself, but I think it was somebody on your end that helped out. So I'll just be brief, and I've actually set my stopwatch for 2 minutes. You don't get a much more exciting February in the state legislature than we had this year, which is we started with abortion, we moved to guns, and then we sprinkled in a little bit of redistricting. So it was a pretty exciting month. I think Senator Clarkson earlier had mentioned Proposal 5, which is the reproductive freedom constitutional amendment that the legislature passed. Amending the Constitution in Vermont is quite a process. It takes 2 legislative bienniums to do that. And we just completed that process. And now the process moves on to the voters in Vermont. So this November, you're going to see on your general election ballot 2 constitutional amendment proposals that are going to be as a final part of the process up to the voters in the state of Vermont. So that's something to look for on the November ballot. The guns issue that I'd mentioned was S30, which was intended to prohibit guns in hospitals, essentially. And it also would close the Charleston loophole. That was something that was hotly debated within the House and also between the House and the Senate. We ultimately passed that bill. The governor vetoed the bill. I think it was a week ago. But it looks like some compromise proposal will be arrived at, and we're hopeful to pass that bill before the end of the session and have the governor sign that bill. That's the hope and expectation. And then finally, I wanted to mention redistricting. This was of some interest in Norwich a couple of months ago. There was a proposal brought forward that would divide Norwich between two different legislative districts. It turns out that the final proposal that the House will probably be voting on later in March would keep the current legislative district intact, and Norwich would join Thetford and Stratford and Sharon and continue to have two representatives in the House of Representatives. And I think, again, Senator Clarkson had mentioned there's a lot of movement in this area on how our Senate districts might change. It looks like Norwich will continue to be in the Windsor district. There's some questions as to whether Norwich will be joined by Thetford and Stratford, actually, in the Windsor district, but also something that's hotly debated. And then one final thing I want to mention, because I know it's of interest, having read the Norwich listserv recently. My committee recently passed a bill. It's a municipal energy resilience bill, and it supports towns in making energy efficiency changes and fuel switching changes in their municipal buildings. And there's about 2,000 old leaky buildings in the state of Vermont that are owned by municipalities. And this bill would support towns in doing work around improving energy efficiency, moving away from fossil fuels. It's a $40 million grant program that towns can apply to that I think would, potentially would be of interest to the town of Norwich, particularly as things around Tracy Hall and work around retrofitting that building are considered. So I'll stop there. Appreciate your patience in waiting for my muting issues. Thanks, John.
Not at all. It's a pleasure to have you here, Representative Briglin. I might just comment that it seems to me that our town has a very, very strong and well-respected legislative delegation. Certainly, both Mr. Briglin and Mr. Masland are very well respected. Mr. Briglin is chair of his committee. Mr. Masland is a highly respected and experienced member of House Ways and Means. Those are really important and frankly, quite powerful positions that our two House members have. And then our three senators all are either chairs or vice chairs of their committee. And as you heard from Senator Clarkson, she's also a majority leader in the Senate. So I think we're rather blessed to have such highly qualified representation in Montpelier. And I know a little bit about what it's like up there. It's if you ever have the opportunity when COVID conditions and restrictions change, a day spent at the State House is a fascinating experience. And I encourage any of you to contact your representatives, and they would be happy to host you for such an excursion. We'll now turn our attention to the 22 articles. As I mentioned, I'm not going to read them. There may be people who have joined the meeting who are prepared to speak as advocates for some of these articles. They would ordinarily be people who have been requested by their nonprofit organization that they may be on the board of or active in to speak at our town meeting, or they may be a person from another community who's here for the purpose of speaking to one of these articles. So the first thing we'll do is invite such people, if there are any. This is not just that, right now, we're happy to hear later on from you about, I like it, I hope we vote for it. That's perhaps not so much that what we're looking for. We're looking for, oh, I see Lucinda Walker is on. That's precisely the kind of people, Sarah Rooker. These are people who are informed advocates and can speak for their organizations. So we're now writing down the names of those who've raised their hands, and we will look forward to see. I see that band Chestnut has joined us. We'll give it another minute or so, and for advocates, informed, knowledgeable advocates, to speak first. You advocates, a couple suggestions. Number one, we're all on a 2-minute tether around here. We don't like it, but that's just the way it is. Number two, remember to unmute yourself, please. And number three, right at the beginning, after identifying yourself, please identify the number of the amendment of the article that you are speaking to. Remember, we have 22 of them, and folks would like to know which of the 22 you are speaking to. We now have 3. We'll begin with Lucinda. Welcome aboard, Ms. Walker.
Hi, so nice to see everyone tonight. I am Lucinda Walker. I am the director of the Norwich Public Library, and I will be addressing Article 25. First of all, I just want to say our grateful thanks to the community for your outstanding support, particularly over the past 2 years. You have kept us very busy, and for that we are so grateful and happy. A lot has changed since I was last here a year ago. One is we are open. We opened in June of 2021 and last week expanded to our regular 6 days a week, which is a very exciting turn of events. And I just can't say enough. If you haven't been in the library recently, you don't need to come in because we still have curbside. But if you want to come in, the doors are open. We welcomed 218 patrons last year. That's a record. We haven't had that many new people join the library since the early 2010s. Circulation has increased. You all love to read. You love to download ebooks and audiobooks. We hired a new youth services librarian, Erin Davison. She is tremendous and is releasing videos every Saturday for kiddos, their songs and story times. This is in preparation for the long-awaited return to story time, which we hope will start in April outside. We are also in the home stretch of our strategic plan, and the many voices, all of you who filled out our community survey, thank you. You're really giving us a good sense of where our blueprint for the future should be.
30
and
seconds.
Just 30 seconds, just want to let you know that the library is here. We're very excited to be welcoming you all back. And if you have any questions or comments, my office door is always open, as many of you will attest. So thanks to everybody. And I hope I came in after 2 minutes.
Sure did. Thanks, Ms. Walker. That was perfect. I would ask all 3 of you to stay around to be available should there be any questions or comments directed to you. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Rooker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Rooker, and I am the director of the Norwich Historical Society, and I'm addressing Article 23. And I also just want to say thanks to so many of you who've been involved in the Historical Society this year. We also welcome lots of new members, and it's been an incredible year with so many new folks coming into the community. This year, we held our first ever community nonprofit resource fair, and it was an opportunity for new families to find out about getting involved and a chance for the organizations to connect. And I must say, it's an incredible variety of opportunities there are in town, and I'm amazed at how many dedicated volunteers we have. We had over 500 people recently attend the Discover Norwich programs, which were designed to deepen our sense of connection and place. And through optional donations, we're going to be able to contribute to the Heating Assistance Fund to help our neighbors during the cold weather, expanding our mission even more. Because Norwich Historical Society, we're caring for the past, but we're really caring also for the present and future of Norwich. We're also the custodians for thousands of photos in an archive and for artifacts such as the town hearse and the town jail. And the house at the corner of Main and Elm serves as a community center, and groups are meeting there again, sitting around our kitchen table, working on the trails, thinking about how to support those who are aging in place, and planning community events. In the spring, we'll be opening a new exhibit combining history and contemporary art. Children are going to be arriving for field trips. Summer walking tours will be embarking all over town, including Union Village for a new tour. This fall, we'll be hosting another Feast from the Farms bicycle and driving tour, and the antique show will be back. And each year, we meet our budget through membership, annual gifts, fundraising, and this town appropriation. We've not increased our town appropriation request in years, and it continues to be an integral part of our budget, and it helps us with everything we're doing. I just want to thank all of you for the ways you support your community's historical society and history, and thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Rooker. And now we'll hear from Mr. Van Chestnut, who I believe will speak about advanced transit. Mr. Chestnut.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I don't really have a formal presentation, but I wanted to let you know that I am here this evening to answer questions that might come up from the residents. And I just wanted to point out that we're Article 15, and the amount requested is the same as it was the year before. And this is to help us continue our services that you can find out at any time what those are by going to advancedtransit.com. So let me know later on if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chestnut. And now we will invite comments or questions from Norwich residents with the usual recommendations. Please identify yourself, your name. Please identify the article to which you wish to speak. And please limit your questions or comments to 2 minutes. So first of all, please raise your hand if you would wish to speak on any of these articles. So far, we're seeing no interest in speaking to any of these articles from residents of the community. We'll give it a little more time. I think you've wowed them. And that is to say, the support for the library, of course, and the Historical Society and the Advanced Transit, I think is awfully well-deserved. I think we benefit in Norwich from some wonderful not-for-profit charitable organizations here in our own community and really in our broader community of the Upper Valley. And I think the community clearly endorses what you three have proposed, and apparently is very supportive of all of these articles. So we're delighted to see that. I thank the three of you each for making yourselves available to us this evening. With that, we are really getting close to the end. You've been very patient. And we will now move to the last two articles. We've covered 40 of the 42 articles on the agenda, and we're left with the last two, which are frankly just the same. They are to transact any business that may legally become, excuse me, that may legally come before the annual Norwich Town Meeting, and a virtually identical article, transact any other business that may legally come before the annual meeting of the Norwich Town School District. Same idea, we can lump them together and consider, quote, other business. Before we start, because it'll be you who have things to say about other business, again, the ground rules are that you may speak only once about Articles 38 and 42, in other words, other business. Please speak only for yourself. As you speak, you're welcome to comment on boards or town organizations in connection with the articles at hand, but please do not speak about individuals. Similarly, again, please do not speak about candidates for town office. At this time, then, we will recognize anybody who wishes to speak. And you can do a number of things. You can talk within the bounds that I've outlined for you. You may offer a motion. However, keep in mind that we cannot accept any motions that would order or direct or otherwise bind any town board or commission, any town employee, or for that matter, any other entity, public or private. In other words, we do not have the authority in this meeting to order anybody to do anything. The kind of thing that we can do, if you wish to, is to offer a motion that expresses the sense of the meeting, if there were such a sense of the meeting. For example, to express appreciation for a beloved teacher who is retiring, or another retiring town employee who's well known and well regarded, that sort of thing. So with that said, we invite you to raise your hand to indicate that you would wish to speak at this time on so-called other business. Please raise your hand. We're seeing one hand. Is Roger on it? We're seeing Ms. Nelson's hand raised. There's some thought that Mr. Arnold, you have raised your hand. Is that correct?
Yes,
I would like thank you. For some reason, it's not visible to us here. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? We have two individuals who wish to be recognized. All right, then we'll start with Ms. Nelson. Ms. Nelson, you're recognized to speak for 2 minutes. You need to unmute, please.
Sorry, dear. Listen, did I hear that you are retiring from being the town moderator?
Yeah, I heard the same thing.
You heard the same thing? Well, in that case, I want to say thank you for all that you've done, because it's been terrific, including this evening.
It's an honor to serve the town.
Yeah. And also, the presentations by everyone have really been terrific. And the amount of time spent doing the graphs and all that, and all the explanations have been really good.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Good thing we're from Norwich.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll now hear from Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Moderator, I think Ms. Nelson took the words out of my mouth, and I'm sure also Mr. Condon and the school board's mouth, which is just to thank you for your work as our moderator. In these unique and challenging times, I think we have absolutely benefited from your knowledge of parliamentary procedure and all your experience as a savvy legislator, I should say. So I think we should just absolutely all thank you for guiding us through, these unique town meetings. And so thank you for Ms. Nelson for beating us to it, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arnold. And thank you all generally for, I think, a very efficient, informative, respectful, and constructive discussion. we're at the end of the agenda. And so as a moderator, I get to say a few words, and they are words of thanks. First, I wish to express my thanks and frankly, my admiration for the service of our school board and our select board. I think until you've done it, you can't imagine what hard work it is. And especially chairing those organizations is incredibly demanding work. And democracy works this way, and it's a darn good thing. I also want to express my thanks to Town Clerk Bonnie Mundy, who now has the job of compiling minutes of this meeting. By the way, that's one of the reasons we're so strict about asking you to identify yourself, so that Ms. Mundy has that information when she compiles the minutes. And most immediately, I want to thank Rod Francis, Linda Gray, and Roger Arnold for their support and guidance to me in the 2 or 3 weeks of preparation that have been going on, planning this work. And then in the last, since about 6:15 this evening, working with me here at Tracy Hall to make sure that this meeting runs as smoothly and effectively as it has. I'm an old guy. I'm not real strong with this technology, and I'm so grateful to have these young bucks around to make it happen. Bucks or does or whatever the appropriate term is. I'm getting way over my head here. And so I want to thank them and acknowledge them for their service here this evening in support of this town meeting. Now, do remember that my next act here will be to gavel this meeting to a close. And remember that the meeting is being adjourned. And that means you need to get to Tracy Hall tomorrow, if you haven't already voted, between 7 a.m., 7 p.m. To vote. And so I will now declare that there being no further business to come before this information session of the town of Norwich and the Norwich School District annual meeting, I now declare this annual meeting adjourned until 7 a.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, 1 March. Thank you.
Thank you.